There we go. We are live, and I'm so stoked to have you because last week we had some technical difficulties. You couldn't join, the audio wasn't working, and I'm so happy to have you here. So, let me introduce you the beautiful Juan Pablo, who is here on Facebook known as James Hendricks. Let's start with that. What's the story with that name? Because I love Juan Pablo. That's such a cool name for us here, anyway. Welcome to
Yeah, I imagine
our
it's exotic. Thank you so much. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here. So I'm very honored by your invitation. So about my name, it is indeed Juan Pablo Beltran. It's actually Juan Pablo Beltran Mainero. It's my name. And I love my name, but it just happened to be that online I am known, I'm a writer and I have an online marketing agency. And just there, I'm known as James Hendricks for some cosmic reasons, and it's just stuck ever since. So it's like online for work, I'm James Hendricks. In real life, I am Juan Pablo. So yeah, James is fine.
Thank you so much. So last week, when we couldn't go live together, we brought Romana's interview forward, which I had luckily pre-recorded due to time differences. And in that video, for those of you who watched it, I actually mentioned the course that I did with the lovely Catherine Ord, and it was based on astrology, and I had no background in it whatsoever. But in that very course, this is where I met you, James, and I just, I said that to you previously, and I'm more than happy to repeat that in front of everyone here. You were such a calming influence for me in that course because I was going through quite a turbulent time at that time when I was going through the course, and every time you were present you just had such a beautiful calming presence, and that's how we actually connected. I just said that to you and I'm like, I'm so grateful that you're here because it's just so beautiful to have you in that course. And yeah, that's how our whole connection started, and we had quite a few catch-ups behind behind the scenes, and I just love who you are, what you do. You're such a beautiful soul. I feel so blessed that we connected. And there is a very particular reason why I asked you to come into this group. And I really like the idea of bringing different cultural backgrounds into this group, how different cultures actually celebrate a death and celebrate the life of that person that has passed. And this is something that we'll discuss in a lot more detail today. So where would you like to get started with that? Because this is your culture and I'd really love to introduce that to our group here.
Well, thank you for all that praise. I don't know if I deserve all of that or any of it, but I'm very grateful. And I can only echo that back to you with much love and respect as well.
Thank you.
So aside from all these flowers that we're throwing at each other, yeah, let's dive into, I guess I can do a bit of an introduction on some of the differences that hail from my culture, which is Mexico. Yes. Mexican culture, which is itself an incredible blend between the indigenous, thousands of year old indigenous cultures, as well as the more modern Catholic Spanish culture. Is a blend of the two. And then of course there's my Juan Pablo's view on all of it. So perhaps we can go back, we can take a trip back in time to the origins, of where this started. Now, of course, who knows how it was going on thousands of years ago, but some historians say that it's even 3,000 or even 4,000 years old, the tradition of the Day of the Dead. So a lot of people have heard about the Day of the Dead, which is similar time as in Halloween, but certainly not the same thing. So I mean, they both are about spirits, and there's a connection to death, and both actually are about fun now, but I will explain a bit more some of the differences. So ages ago,
because like I've certainly heard of the Day of the Death, and a lot of people here would have, yet I really don't know much about it, apart from that it's colourful and that you do celebrate the death, which I really loved. And we had the beautiful Dr. Nicole Gruhl here before to talk about her samurai grandmother and how they celebrate the death and the person's passing and also the life of the person. And I really love the idea. And when I talk to you, James, I'm like, I need to bring you to this group, because not only do I love your energy and your beautiful soul, but your whole cultural background. I thought you have so much to give here. So yes, please do take us back a little bit on that history path, because that is really something that I'd like to hear more about.
Sure. Sounds good. So, okay, I'll try to keep it sweet, short and sweet. Basically, it was not seen when a person died 1,000 years ago in the Aztec, Toltec, and more ancient cultures in the Mexico area. It was not seen as a time of grief. It was not seen as a time of sadness. It was seen as a time of celebration. Not celebration that the person has died, like, ha ha ha, you're dead, but more as in, it is wonderful that this person has gone beyond the threshold of life to death and continuing this journey, because they had a very, like so many pre-Christian, Islamic, Judaist, I guess, mythological or religious views of life and death. They saw it as a cyclical pathway that we all go into. When we're alive, we die, but then we're also alive, we're dead, and we go into a greater unity. So how this panned out for the Aztecs and similar indigenous races was that it was a month-long celebration praising a goddess who is called Mictecaciahuatl, who is La Santa Muerte, or the Holy Dead. She was a beautiful lady who was sacrificed as a baby, but then she woke up in Mistlan, which is this land of the dead. And she married the king of the dead, basically. And together they would rule the land of the dead, but also they would take care of the land of living by picking up the bones of the dead, and they would bring good vibes, basically. So to praise this couple, and especially the goddess of death, and I love that it was a goddess, that was the principal one, and not necessarily the god. So to praise this goddess, they would do this month-long celebration, which happened in the fall usually, and in autumn, which I guess would be anyway, it's not it's in the northern hemisphere, the fall. And it was a time of celebrating the life of the person, not being sad. In fact, there was a lot of dancing, a lot of rituals, bonfires. And then some of the more common elements of this Day of the Dead, which have kept to this day, are the altars, which were not to go and pray, but it was more just to welcome back the living, because during this month-long celebration, which then became the Day of the Dead in the 1st and 2nd of November, when it was sort of blended with the Catholic views.
Exactly.
It was
about
that. So it's a huge blend, and there's also elements of European paganism that blended with the Catholic views, and then that got blended with the indigenous views, and that's become the Day of the Dead, where now you see these skulls and you see these Catrinas, which is this view of everyone is a skeleton. You can dress up real fancy, but we're all gonna die. But it's not a bad thing. It makes us realize that life is short and we can enjoy it. So this is really trying to summarize these elements of it. So feel free to ask anything about it, but that's a summary.
I really love the idea of celebrating that. And I also always want to put this disclaimer in here, I really understand and absolutely respect that everybody watching this has got different views and a different kind of faith, and I really honor that. Yet I love the idea of bringing different views into this group. And also what I love about it the most is, imagine a world, a life without that pain of grief, where it's not even part of your thinking. It's not even part of, it wouldn't even cross your mind. That is part of your culture, that when somebody comes to the time that it's his time to leave this planet, that his whole family and his friends come together and celebrate. I just absolutely love this idea because, you know, when Rob passed, that's what we did. We came together and celebrated. And I'll never forget that. The wake that we had for him was a celebration of his life. I walked around, I had so many happy chats with his friends and family, and everybody shared beautiful memories about him. And there was laughter, there was lightness. And I didn't expect that because in our world, you know, in his parents have got quite a strong Catholic background, you know, being Mauritian and Italian. And I totally respect that. I was brought up Catholic, so that was my original background as well. Um, Grief and pain is a huge part of losing someone. And that's the wording already, you know, it's the losing someone and not somebody passes over. And I really prefer that term, somebody passes over, because that's how I see it. And to grow up in a culture like that must have been absolutely amazing. And um, I know, James, that you personally were fortunate enough to not have lost a life partner or anything per se. Um, but I know that you have lost a very close friend of yours. And would you mind sharing how you actually dealt with that? What happened for you when you got those news? Because I'm not really sure. Like, do you feel sadness about that, or do you just instantly celebrate? I'd really love to hear your personal background about that.
Sure. And okay, so what happened was that I got a phone call in my early 20s. I remember it very well. I was in my living room. I was just minding my own business. I think I was at university. And this phone call was from my high school best friend's brother, who was calling me to let me know that my friend, my high school best friend, had an accident, a car accident. He passed away in that car accident. His girlfriend was in the car. She survived, fortunately, but he didn't. And yeah, it was very shocking. I hadn't had anything like that happen before. I was 22. And yeah, I didn't know exactly how to deal with it straight away. I just, let the emotions wash over me. I hadn't been that much in contact with him since maybe once a month or so, since being together every day in high school. So it wasn't an immediate, I just didn't know exactly how to deal with it. But I did, after a day or two, realize that I needed to do two things. One of them was to go to Mexico, to the event in which they would, it's usually in Mexico nowadays, it's with the ashes. So you put them in a nicho, and then usually they're stored in a church or church basement. So yeah, the idea was to go to the event. I met with the family after the event, and we were there. We talked stories about Rodrigo, his name, and actually we had a fairly good time. It was all centered around Rodrigo, but Rodrigo was a very, very funny guy. He was one of those that was loved by everyone. So smart, so funny, with such a potential. And then this just happens, and one thinks, okay, well, what's the point? What's the meaning? Why does this happen to good people? And yeah, we talked about just the things that made us happy about him. And when I left, of course, I was sad. But I guess I already had some of the beliefs that I carry nowadays, which were that was just his time, and there was nothing that we could have done to change that. So I guess, yeah, through the days, the weeks, the years, I've always looked back and thought that was an amazing person. I was so honored to be so close for quite a few years. And yeah, and then I don't think what if, or if only something would have been different. I'm grateful for our time together. And whenever I meet people nowadays who remind me of him, or who, or in their own way, they're special, or very special, like you are, Marie. I'm in awe and in gratefulness, because I know how limited our time can be on Earth, and at any moment it can go. So this type of experiences have actually led me to be even more celebratory of life. So I feel like I've become a happier person by acknowledging the swiftness of life itself.
I couldn't agree more with you, James. And I really want to thank you for sharing that, because it just made me realize that's exactly what happened when Rob passed. You know, my decision was made there and then that I have to and want to create the happiest life possible for the three of us. And I did not really think about it in such a conscious way until you just said that my life actually became a lot more conscious and happier. And I want to make that very clear. It wasn't that I was not happy with Rob. I was very happy with him. We had a really beautiful relationship, and everybody who knows us can see that. It was so apparent. Yet it is such a different level of consciousness that I've gotten to after Rob passed, because you go into this state of you just don't know how long you've got. And yes, sometimes I have to admit there was a little bit of a fear-based thinking around that as well. In particular, in the very early days, I remember that my biggest fear was that something could happen to the boys after Rob passed. It was a very heavy, very unnatural, very debilitating fear that I had, that I really needed to work on. And I can't even give you the exact time, how long it took. Yet I remember that one day I realized that it had gone. It wasn't there anymore. And I talk to a lot of parents that say, oh, it's just normal that you have a certain fear that something could happen to your kids. But I knew very well that my fear was not normal. It was very intense and really debilitating, like nightmares and anxiety, and like really, really worried about that. And that was in the very first few weeks. And I believe somewhere along the lines, I made a decision that I didn't want to live like that. As in, I want to change that. I really want to live life to the fullest and happiest. And yes, I've got my human moments like everybody else. I'm not superhuman, and I'm not always walking around on flowers and spreading love hearts like confetti everywhere. It's, you know, I'm human, and I just love that it has shifted my mind to appreciating things on a very different level. And I really love that. Would you like to share with us a little bit about your beliefs and your background? Because I really like how spiritual you are and what your beliefs are. I'd really love for you to share that a little bit, what your background and your thoughts around that are, if you don't mind.
Sure. And I just wanted to say thank you for opening your heart. I've seen other interviews that you've done and talks, and of course we've chatted quite a bit, and it's very humbling how vulnerable you put yourself so you can express these things to help others.
Thank you.
I think that's wonderful. In terms of my background and current beliefs, well, you can see my shirt, like a Ganesh, like a Hindu god, and my background very Bali. I've been in Bali for a bit of time.
Bali at the moment, which is so amazing.
I am grateful to be in Bali. Yes, I was actually supposed to be in Australia much of last year, and I was planning on being there this year too. Haven't, of course, but I'm fortunate to be here in Bali. I've got another 5 weeks here.
Yeah, another 5 weeks.
Yeah, another 5 weeks, and then I'll go back to back to Mexico, stopping through the US for a few weeks. Yeah,
I didn't know that. Wow, there you go.
Yeah. So in the past few years, I've become more and more and more, I want to say convinced, but let's just say it felt right, this belief that I have with me, that much like the ancient beliefs of the Aztecs, and indeed most pagan or ancient societies of the world, that life, death, and the cycle at a cosmic level is, well, indeed is cyclical, and therefore it's a sort of a loop, an evolving continuous loop. And yeah, I guess it's sort of a mix between Hinduism and Buddhism and animism, which animism is where there's sort of everything is alive, or at least there's a life force in our surroundings, not necessarily just like creatures, plants. And so in my esoteric point of view, I do feel like there's an aliveness to everything.
Yeah.
I'm one of those that it kind of looks like quite silly, but if I bump onto a wall, I'll be like, oh, sorry. That's more maybe. that's actually, I don't know why I do that. It's probably just a force of habit. But there's a part of me that certainly believes that what brings consciousness in humans and a level of consciousness to other creatures, it actually exists perhaps in a much smaller way, but still there in everything that surrounds us. And it's just our big human brains that allows us to really leverage that consciousness.
Yeah.
So if you really want to get into it, I think that we are all part of this greater unity, this greater collective consciousness. This is something that really helps me in terms of picturing me and you and everyone else and how we all fit in this great picture as just one, as all being one. We're just in different bodies, different human bodies, of course. But I think my consciousness is your consciousness. We just have our own perspectives. So again, this might get a bit esoteric and a bit abstract, but it's definitely made me, I feel, a better person, because when I go to the street and I see someone, homeless person, or I think of the richest person or anyone, I don't see them as above or below. Yeah. It's all the same as me. And I go a bit deeper into that. I actually see a dog or a butterfly and I see them the same, just in a smaller, colorful way. And so I feel humbled to be sharing this universe or this planet with all of these creatures. Now, people that know me know that I'm like obsessed with animals, so maybe that's also shaped quite a bit my views on all of this.
That's how our connection started as well. We talk a lot about your dog and my dog.
we do that. Well, they're very cute. So I guess that's more the current way, and it's got a huge element of Buddhism for sure in it, and of non-attachment. That's another one that goes into not just life and death, and not having which doesn't, a misconception is often that yes, attachment can lead to suffering, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have connections, really deep, super strong connections. It's just that once it's ended, it's letting go of it. Not saying, oh, I never cared about it in the first place, or I will stop caring. It's just being grateful that existed, whether it was a good one or a bad one. If it's a bad one, it's a lesson. We can always learn from them. So then just moving on forwards with our lives, being able to form new connections. In the end, that's my view, that's what we're here for, to create connections. When we're worried about or anxious about or attached to previous ones, it's very natural, of course, because we might be nostalgic or we think of better times. It's so natural, but it may also get in the way of us forming new bonds with other people or even with ourselves.
Yeah, I really like that view, and I'd love to ask you something about that actually, because I previously talked to one of my mentors about that as well, and mentor friends, I should call her, Tanya. She's been in one of my previous interviews here, and I'm going through this course called Body EQ with her, which has brought up so many layers for me that needed to be healed and needed to be seen. And I always talk about that in my courses about, see it, acknowledge it, heal it. That's like always the same circle. You need to see something, you need to acknowledge it, and then you can heal it. And for me, that was also like that idea of attachment and how you deal with it. And she talked about this book that she recommended to me called Spiritual Divorce. And I only just started reading into it because I did order it. And the very first page really got me. I thought this is really an interesting concept that once we form a connection with somebody, it just never stops. it's like even if we get officially divorced, spiritually we're not. We're still connected, and we always will have that connection. And I thought that's a very interesting point of view, because that's what we feel. You know, all of us have probably got that one ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, ex-partner, ex-whatever, that we still really feel connected to. That still every now and then when we see or hear something about him or her, it's that, you know, it deflates us quickly, and we have to work through these layers, and we're like, oh my God, here comes again. And it's really interesting when you think about that in terms of from a healing point of view, because, you know, in this group here, the biggest thing that we heal is that physical detachments from our loved ones that have passed before us. And that is the biggest pain point for most people here in the group. And because not everybody and most people in this group actually don't have that belief that it's something to celebrate, unfortunately, because I think it would be really beautiful if we could all see it that way. Yet we all have different cultural backgrounds. So
Yes.
most people feel that physical and emotional pain. I remember when Rob passed, for the first time in my life, realizing that I did feel grief on a physical level. It was a physical pain that I felt like somebody had emptied some acid in my stomach. That's how I felt. And it was excruciating. It was really painful. And to work through that, to then think of it as a spiritual divorce, as in really disconnecting, but on a healthy level. So we don't feel that attachment anymore as a negative thing, if that makes sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. How do you see that?
It's such a good question, because indeed this is different for everyone, because we're all affected in our own ways from our backgrounds and our personalities too. So this, of course, comes from my limited experience. But the way that I see it, I guess I use an analogy with when it's not necessarily just someone that has stopped living, but someone that just has stopped living with us. Yeah. So they're still alive when a relationship ends. And a relationship that can be, you know, a month long and it was very intense, or 20 years long, and there's a divorce, like you mentioned. It is grief that a person goes through. It is a part of you that goes missing. And so this process, I've had this with previous relationship, and it is this sort of breakup, and it's utterly excruciating. Like you said, it's physical pain. It's such deep emotional pain that I imagine it worse than any physical pain that I had felt before. And this went on for quite a while, and I learned quite a bit from it after all the pain and the hurt. And I realized that initially we have to, no matter how much we avoid it, we must let it in. We must let it wash over us, no matter how painful it is. Because if not, then it's always going to be there lingering, and that period can take who knows how long. Can take a day, can take years, right? But we must let it wash over us. And then afterwards, it's the acceptance of what has been. And yeah, I guess in my view, it's which again, of course, I haven't had the experience of a partner passing away. So this just comes from intense breakups or from other family members that have passed away, or friends. But it is, yeah, it is, again, once again, a celebration of the time that's happened. And I will use one more analogy, which is not just with the relationships, but now we can went into spirituality and esoteric ways. Now we can go into something a bit more scientific. So for about 100 years, within, a lot of people think that the quantum world, quantum mechanics, is like this modern science, but it's actually, you know, a century old. It's just been evolving through time. And it has been known for quite some time, for many decades, that when two particles have interacted with each other, they remain connected, even if they're on opposite sides of the universe. There's this concept called entanglement, or quantum entanglement. And so I believe this happens to, I mean, there's more specificity to this, a bit simplistic, but basically, yes, they can be on the other side of the planet, the other side of the galaxy, the universe, and they still, what happens to one affects the others in their spin. And so having this connection between them, I think it's exactly the same thing that happens with two humans or two creatures that have bonded in some way, or even just connected in some way. No matter how it ends later on, there's still that connection.
Yeah.
This, even though it seems to imply that there's an attachment there, you know, maybe it's getting into semantics, but I would say it's a connection, and it is just the mind and the emotions that we should, you know, that we should allow to move onwards, because the connection will always be there. Connection to people that we shared a life with who have passed away, or people who shared a life with who are not in our lives anymore. So that again fills me with a nice feeling of having that connection, but not having to spend all this time and energy, emotion, focusing on it. Yeah,
I agree with that. For me, it's that moment when you are so aware of that connection, and you know, in terms of a breakup, it can come up as really painful. Yet when you get to that point, like where you process and heal so much of it, that you can actually be grateful for that beautiful connection. And when you feel that, when it becomes a beautiful feeling of connection rather than a painful reminder of the disconnection, if that makes sense. And that is probably the highest stage to aim for when you, and that to me brings back that whole philosophy of Byron Katie, loving what is. And that is my absolute go-to for everything. This is my absolute highest state of living that I'd love to be in all the time. And I'm definitely not, I'm a work in progress, you know, but this is my go-to level, loving what is, getting to that level where you can just feel love and gratitude in your heart for what you have experienced and the gifts that you had with this person in your life. And I'm literally saying that with no disrespect to those people who have lost somebody to death, but I'm saying that to everyone, whether that person has passed or whether that was a breakup, that it is just so beautiful when you can get to that level of being grateful and having your heart full of gratitude and love and beautiful memories of the time that you had together, even though it's not here anymore, rather than constantly sitting in that pain. And it's something that I strongly believe we can decide to get to. It's a decision we need to make, because in this group here, I hear that quite a bit, and in other grief support groups, like I always say, I hear it a lot, that, you know, with time it will get better. And I couldn't disagree more. It's not time that makes it better. It's you who makes it better. It's a decision you make. It's the focus, where you put your focus on, and whether you put your focus on the passing or the life that you had together. You know, you can choose that every single day. If you think of that, you know, if you have happy thoughts, or if you constantly stare at that closed door. Because for me, it's always like when you just sit in the pain and in the suffering and only allow that in your life, and you literally block out happiness. I can't possibly be happy anymore. A lot of people actually make the decision, my life is not ever going to be the same. Well, of course not. How can it be the same? But there doesn't have to be something negative. Because people always say that, it's like, oh, my life will never be the same. And they say it in a resignating way. And I'm like, well, of course it won't be the same. That's a huge divider. It's you know, it's like you change tracks. Yes, your life is not the same anymore. That doesn't mean that it has to be over or negative or a constant pain. It's you who chooses what you do with your life. And that is my strongest belief. You know, I put all my efforts into focusing on love and happiness, and I saw so much love around me, and people were always like, doesn't it hurt you when you see couples walking hand in hand? I'm like, no, it gives me hope. Like, that's like every couple I see in love give me hope for our society, because we need so much more of that. So and that's the focus you put out there.
I gotta say, that's pretty amazing. I've actually never heard it phrased that way. The the juxtaposition of time will make it better versus it's on the person. I think what tends to happen a lot with losing a job, losing a relationship, losing a loved one's life is a sense of powerlessness. Like I couldn't do anything to avoid it, or what could I have done to avoid it? And it's just it will go on and on and on, and it'll be endless. However, you can't change the past, you can't change what happened, but you can change what goes on afterwards. So I really love that empowerment that you give when you phrase it that way, that it's not time itself that will do it, it's the person who chooses to do it. And there need not be any guilt in choosing to be happy. I mean, I would be very surprised if a deceased person would prefer that their widow would prefer to be sad as opposed to happy, right? So yeah, I really agree with that. I'm gonna remember that.
Well, I always say
gonna remember that phrasing.
The power lies in how we respond to our adversity, and people feel so powerless because they couldn't do anything about it. And I'm like, well, we are not God or whatever or whoever you believe in. Again, everybody's got a different faith and a different background in that, but whatever you believe in, who makes a decision over us living or dying, we can't decide that. We can't decide how long we've got on this planet, but we can decide how we respond to things. And I think that a lot of people need to hear that as a reminder, because they just tap into this or sink into this feeling of powerlessness, where we have the power to decide every single day what we do and how we respond to it. And I do understand and really honor and respect that it does take time for you to allow that. It needs time to process it, but time is not the deciding factor for your healing. It's what you do with that time. That's really, really important. That's such an important difference. So I understand why people say time will make it easier, but I don't agree with it. It's really what you do with that time, what you focus it, and how you allow yourself to process. Because not many people do that. Often people do get stuck in the guilt factor and in the questioning, what if, or could I have done something differently? Well, does it change anything about the now?
Right.
Yes. It changes that you are sitting in a miserable and horrible and suffering spot, but it will never change the fact that this person has died. So both options are completely negative. So why choose it? And I'm saying that in an absolute respectful way. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way for those people who are stuck in that, but I'm saying it as an invitation that there is help out there, and there are different ways to cope with it and process that. So I need you to
No, that's true. That's true. And actually, as you're saying this, I have some direct experience with someone who did put themselves through so much pain and suffering for decades, the day that they died. So that was my maternal grandmother. Beautiful, lovely. Well, she was my tita. She was just very loved. However, her joy, her passion for life, she was actually a dancer. She stopped being a professional dancer when she married my grandpa. And of course, to focus on raising her 6 children, as was the tradition at the time. She was, she was remembered as a joyful, happy person. And then when my grandfather passed away, I was a kid. I was maybe about 6 years old. But I remember that, in fact, pretty much all my memories of my grandma were of a sweet, sad lady. And that's, and I mean that with a lot of respect, because she was wonderful, and I heard so many amazing stories. But she was pretty much dressed every single day in black, and she was constantly, you could see that there was the mourning process that was lasting not just for for a few years, but again for decades, right?
Mm.
And I didn't understand it because I was just a kid, and when she passed away in my late 20s, and I guess part of me thought, yeah, if only that, those if onlys, right? But this one was like, if only she hadn't put so much of her time being sad and yes, perhaps miserable indeed, just thinking how much she missed her partner. So and that actually, you know, I think that's a common occurrence with a lot of people, and I mean that it's currently happening with my only other living grandparent, my paternal grandmother, who her husband, my granddad, also passed away a few years ago, and then her favorite son, my uncle, who was just yeah, I mean, there's no favorite sons, but that was the favorite son. She loves all of them dearly, but that was, he was just a glowing ball of goodness. He was just always smiling, happy, helping. And of course, he last year, COVID times, he died not from virus, but from the depression of being constricted in a space, because he loved being outside, he loved being social. I think there are a lot of stories like this of this depression and death numbers. So it was heart related, but yeah, cardiac. But yeah, it was really tough on my grandma, because they would talk every single day, and he would go and bring her things, and it's strange to say, but it's been, at least visibly for us, the grandchildren, the children, it seems like it's been even more difficult than the already difficult part of the husband passing away, because it's just so much joy of having that kid just giving you happiness with jokes, with good times, with bringing sweet bread in the mornings, with having these phone calls, just having that bond, that connection, not being there, that this big piece of your life that's missing, and it's never going to come back. No matter how many times you look at the photo of the person, it's not going to change the fact that it's happened, because the only things that we know are that we're going to die, and that things are constantly changing. But we try, because it feels bad not to. Sometimes we try to think, yeah, no, I want things to just go back to being the same. I want things to go back to before the pandemic. These things are not going to happen. We have to adapt to these super strange circumstances, because there'll always be strange circumstances or new circumstances, and that is difficult to, I mean, it can be good in theory, but it's difficult in practice for people when a close one passes away. But perhaps hearing other people's perspectives, and maybe even other cultures' perspectives, can help.
I love that you mentioned that, James, because I felt when you said that, wow, what an impact your perspective might have on the older viewers in here, because there are a lot of people in this group that have got grandkids, that talk about their grandkids all the time, and how it's the light of their lives, you know, to have the grandkids and to look after them. And I'm also thinking of one in particular, Terry. You know, she's been in my interview series here before as well, and has shared very openly about losing her son, who left behind 3 grandkids for her. And I think Terry's doing an amazing job. You know, she's done so amazing in her healing journey. I always am so blown away by the work that she's done. Yet for all the grandparents out there, to hear your words, you know, how you perceived your grandmother as such a sad person, knowing that she was full of joy, I really hope that that triggers something for you watching this right now, that it is your choice right now, for the next however many years you've got left on this planet, to be a happy grandparent for those beautiful grandkids of yours that you constantly talk about. You know, you could be their light of their lives, and it is your choice every single day. They would be such a beautiful reason to do that, and imagine what an impact you would have on their lives, and how much you could change their life when in 10, 20, 30 years from now they'll be sitting in a random interview like change this with me now and talk about what a beautiful impact their grandparents had in their lives with their positivity and their happiness. Just picture that. I just needed to share that because that came up for me while you were talking, where I thought, wow, you know, what one decision that you can make every single day, no matter what happened the last 10, 20, 30 years, no matter how you lived your life, you can always change it every single day. And that's what Rob always said to me, you know, you've got a decision to make every single day, what you focus on, the positive or the negative. And I knew instantly
Very wise.
where my focus had to be, where I wanted my focus to be, not I have to. This is another thing with the choice, you know, like the same thing with the time myth that time heals all the wounds. It doesn't. It's your decision. And the same thing is with the choice, where people think, and I hear that often as well. It's such a common phrase in those grief groups. Well, I had no choice. I had to get up in the morning. I had to be there for the kids. Well, no, you didn't have to. It's a choice you made, but you're not giving yourself credit for it. You could have stayed in bed. You could have gone completely down mental health track. Not that I'm suggesting that, but I'm saying there was a choice there that you might have not made on a conscious basis. But I believe this is where healing starts, when we acknowledge that we actually did make a choice to make it out of bed every morning, to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner for them, to be there for the kids. Even if you might have not been the happiest and brightest version that you wish you could have been for your kids, but you did get up and you were there. And I think we really need to give ourselves credit for those things, for what we actually do, and not slip back into victim role. Well, I had no choice. You did have a choice. And I really want to highlight that, because people often don't understand that. They fall into this, well, I have to. No, you chose to every morning, even if it was not on a conscious basis. So I really like that idea. Mm.
I agree with that too.
Yeah. Well, where to from here?
Yeah, I know, I know, right? It's had a really nice flow. It's I wanted to offer my like an opinion on this thing that's come up a few times about the just allowing time to heal things, because yeah, time has a lot of properties, but not necessarily just healing things personally, emotionally on its own. It's our choice. And I just keep thinking, like, if a person is just in that mindset, it's just gonna wake up every single day thinking, is today the day that I stop worrying? Is today the day that I feel better? Is today the day that I don't feel sad anymore? And this aspiration towards this day of joy may never come when the work hasn't been done. And the work can be something as simple as I'm ready to accept what is, right? But I mean, something as simple can be, again, really difficult, can take time. The other thing that I wanted to say, I guess, before we finish, is that I remember this thing about the ancient traditions of the Aztecs and the Toltecs and other Nahuatl indigenous peoples from the Mexico South and Central area. And that's so they would actually part of the reason why there were skeletons and skulls was certainly for remembrance that we're all gonna die, right? That's just a given, and therefore we shouldn't be sad but happy that we're still alive, and by being happy for the people that have passed away, we can also think of their happy moments, and therefore create more happy moments in our daily lives. But what reminded me this of was that as the years went by and the decades went by, so different people within these indigenous cultures and then the Mexican culture were doing this tradition, which is the calaveritas, which now is just the little skulls dressed in these fancy sort of like French styled suits and dresses. But originally the calaverita, which stands for little skeleton, that's what it means. But these calaveritas were these funny epitaphs that were ostensibly, it was pretend to be written by the dead, making fun of the living. right? So now it's just literally the literal like skulls. Sometimes they're made of sugar, but back then they were actually, yeah, so there were these epitaphs. They were published in newspapers and other text media. But yeah, it was supposed to be just making fun of the living. It was just jokes. You know, like look at these humans going to work every day. Don't they see that it's that that life is better when you chill?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Maybe not with the modern lingo, but you know what I mean? Like it was not about sadness both ways, not them, us to them, living to the spirit world. It was the spirit world to the living. And I think this is important to recognize as well, because so much of grief carries sadness with it. Of course, the part is missing and we're sad that it's missing. But by remembering some of the joyful, happy moments and being able to carry this sense of humor, perhaps not necessarily of the experience itself or the connection itself, but just having a sense of humor within life and moving forward. When talking to your children, grandchildren, family, friends, this is part of the healing process as well. I mean, it can be difficult to say, okay, I'm gonna let things go and I'm gonna be happy from today onwards. That can be difficult, but just faking it till you make it can also help. It's a path by just being happy.
Happiness, like the triggers, like Rob was a extremely humorous and fun person, you know, and so often, like I remember, like at the funeral, and in particular the eulogy that the siblings have written for Rob, people were laughing in the audience. It was so refreshing and so beautiful, because I really felt it captured his essence so beautifully, rather than 500 plus people sitting around crying. And I'm not saying don't cry for my husband, you know, that's, who am I to say that? Of course, we all cried, we all grieved, it's all part of it. Yet I always say, allow all of it in. There is all of it there when a person passes. There is the happiness, the joy, the beautiful, funny memories, you know, the cracker of, you know, stories that you tell. Don't be shy, allowing that in as well. Don't just stay on the everything's over, my life's, you know, my life's, your life is not over. And that is a really amazing reminder here. James, I know we talk about that at the very beginning and you kind of gave us a bit of an overview, but can you please, before I let you go, talk us through the day of death? What happens there? How do people prepare for it? How do they actually celebrate? What happens in Mexico when you do that? Like, I'd love to get a bit of a virtual tour through that, if you don't mind. Take us
along. Of course. So let's go on a ride along the rural areas of Mexico, but because it doesn't really happen so much in the cities anymore. Now we have massive parades in the cities, but in the homes of the people it happens less and less, because cities are more cosmopolitan. So let's say it happens much more commonly in the outside of the cities. You have pretty much every house, when it's the Day of the Dead in the 20th and 21st century, you have an altar where you have some food, some water, some photos, maybe a bottle of tequila, probably a bottle of tequila, because it's supposed to welcome the dead. These are the days when it used to be for a month in like July and August, and now it was moved with the Catholics to 1st and 2nd of November. So this when it happens, particularly on the 2nd of November and 2 days after Halloween. So yeah, you have this altar in your home, and some towns have like big altars in the public square, and it's not about mourning, it's about celebrating, it's about welcoming back the spirits and having a party together. For those who have watched the movie Coco, which is wonderful, they might relate to that. Yeah, if you want to learn, it's actually, I mean, it's Pixar, so it's animated. Some parts have been, of course, you know, cartoonified literally, but it grows, it shows very well. It was very well researched into the alebrijes as well, which are these fantastical, mythical, colorful creatures that are they're they're these crafts that are created by by artisans in Mexico that held back hundreds, at least hundreds, if not thousands of years. So these wooden creatures, they're painted in all these super bright colors, and it's they also come from the land of the spirit to the land of the living during this time. They're supposed to be like floating around as well as or just being there on the ground as well, along with the dead, who people know that they can't see them, but they feel like they can feel them.
Yeah.
So in commemoration of these alebrijes, which are these wooden creatures, these mythical owl-shaped creatures. So they're also created, and you might see them in the altars. You might see them small or super big. I've got a couple at my parents' house. So and they're kind of like dragons, like half dragon, half dog, with like they're like no creature, but kind of a mishmash of other creatures. So these things are part of it, and the welcoming people and having a party, having a lot of bougainvilleas. It's a flower which in English is called a marigold. There are these yellowish, kind of like light orange colored flowers which have this very strong smell. It's beautiful smell, and they're just arranged in the most gorgeous ways. You have papel machado. It's this kind of paper. It's like these many layers of very light paper that's just just layers on top of each other, and then they're cut in a very traditional way to show the little skeletons or hearts or what have you, just all over the place. Honestly, it's a party. And the big celebrations that happen both in the smaller towns and in the big cities as well, maybe not in many people's houses, but in the big cities, at the squares and parades in the big streets, they're like, people join, they dress up in this sort of colonial type clothes. Originally it was made to make fun of the rich people, the rich class of Mexico, because they was dressed up in all these fancy ways, but they're all skeletons. That's the idea. So now the concept is to paint ourselves as skeletons in quite beautiful ways, and then to dress up in these fancy ways. I think the irony now has been lost, but it's a tradition now. So some of the symbolic meanings get lost through time, of course, but it's still such strong elements of the tradition that are carried even now in 2021. There was a smaller one this year in the bigger cities. I imagine the smaller towns there were some differences to previous years, but sorry, in 2020, last year. But yeah, it's been it's been something that I'm grateful. It's probably my favorite aspect of Mexican culture, that it's still, no matter how much the Spanish, when they arrived to Mexico, they tried to defeat it. They destroyed temples. They tried to convert everyone to Catholicism, and most people indeed are Catholic. All my grandparents are or were Catholic. It's still something that's blended with the European paganism, with the religion, Catholicism, as well as the ancient beliefs. Now we have this mishmash that still to this day, this year in November, we'll have in some form in the towns and in the cities, and I think it's wonderful. I don't know if I'll be there for it. I might still be in Bali. I might have come back to Bali.
That you were actually there for the Day of the Death.
It's quite a long time ago. I would say it was about 7 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, 8 or 7 years ago. Yeah. I was there with a friend.
You grew up with such a beautiful culture around you. It's really, and it so shines through you, James. You really are so beautiful and colourful, and you can tell that you celebrate and embrace life with all your heart and all your spirit. I just love it. I love that we connected. I love that we had the hour together to actually talk about that and bring that to our audience. As cultural awareness, it doesn't have to be your faith. I really want to very respectfully highlight that everybody's faith is different, as I said at the beginning. Yet I really love the idea of bringing more and more cultures and introduce them to the concept of loving life after loss, because it just so nicely goes hand in hand. So any final words you would like to share with us before we conclude? Because I just realized we're already past an hour and it just went way too quick. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. You were worried if we would have enough content to
Yeah, I was like,
cover
how
an
are we
hour.
talk about a day after death? That we're going to fill the hour, and here we go. We could still talk forever.
We can have a part 2 version like
Yeah.
6 months from now or something.
Thank
Yeah, no, thank you so much. By the way, you're far too kind with all your compliments.
you.
So you know that I reciprocate them, and I think you're wonderful, and especially what you do here with this group. It's very special, and I think the bigger that it is, just the idea of it, and of course the group itself, I think the better, so people can embrace love in their lives when faced with such difficulties. I mean, I say this, I guess relatively young, so it kind of comes across as, you know, not really knowing what I'm talking about, and that's fair enough. But at least I wanted to give my perspective, personal and cultural.
Yeah, like that. You're such an old soul, and I can feel that every time I talk to you. So I really appreciate that you came into this group and shared your cultural background with us, because it's just yeah, really beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you came. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
All right, this is James and Marie signing off. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you have any questions around that, any comments, please feel free to comment below, and you can tag James under James Hendricks. He's in our group here, so if you have any questions for him or comments, please tag him in it, and we will get back to you. So have a beautiful day or evening wherever you are. Bye for now. Thank you.